Aiden had worked at the small gas station for almost a year now. It wasn't the best job, but it helped him pay his bills and save up for college. The night shift was always quiet, sometimes even boring. Most customers were truck drivers, late-night travelers, or police officers stopping for coffee. But tonight, something felt different. The air outside was unusually still. The usual hum of passing cars on the highway had died down, leaving an eerie silence. Inside the store, the bright lights flickered slightly, making Aiden glance up at them. He sighed. Another long night. He checked the clock. 11:47 p.m. Only a few more hours to go. Aiden leaned on the counter, scrolling through his phone, waiting for the next customer. That's when the door chimed, signaling someone had entered. He quickly straightened up and looked toward the entrance. A man in a dark hoodie walked in, his face partially hidden by the hood. He moved quickly to the back of the store, barely looking at Aiden. Something about him made Aiden uneasy. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact, or the way he kept glancing toward the front door, as if checking if someone was watching him. Aiden shook off the feeling. Maybe the guy was just cold. Maybe he just wanted to grab a drink and leave. But then, something else caught Aiden's attention. The storage room door in the back, normally closed, was slightly open. That was strange. Aiden was sure he had locked it earlier. His heart began to beat a little faster. Was someone back there? Or had he just forgotten to close it properly? Before he could think too much about it, the door chimed again. This time, Aiden felt relieved. It was Officer Daniels. The friendly police officer had been coming to the gas station every night for the past few months. He always ordered a large coffee, sometimes a sandwich, and made small talk before heading back on patrol. "Hey, kid," Daniels said with a smile as he approached the counter. "Quiet night." Aiden nodded, but his mind was still on the man in the hoodie. He hesitated before answering, then forced a smile. "Yeah, pretty quiet." Daniels poured himself a cup of coffee, not noticing Aiden's nervous glance toward the back of the store. He added sugar, stirring slowly. "That's good. Means no trouble, right?" Aiden swallowed hard. He didn't know why, but his gut told him something wasn't right. He glanced at the receipt paper next to the register. An idea formed in his mind, one that could either get him in trouble or save someone's life. With slightly shaky hands, he printed the officer's receipt and grabbed a pen. He quickly scribbled a short message on it before handing it over. "Help. Call 911. Man in back." As Officer Daniels took the receipt, Aiden prayed that he would notice, because if he didn't, something bad was about to happen. Officer Daniels took the receipt from Aiden without much thought. He was used to these routine stops, grabbing a coffee, chatting for a few minutes, then heading back to his patrol. But as he looked at the small slip of paper, something unusual caught his eye. There was handwriting on it. At first, he thought Aiden had just written something extra, maybe a joke or a friendly note. But as his eyes focused on the words, his grip on the paper tightened. "Help. Call 911. Man in back." A wave of alertness rushed through him. His heart rate picked up, but his face remained calm. Years of experience had taught him how to control his emotions in tense situations. The last thing he wanted was to alert the wrong person that he knew something was wrong. He looked up at Aiden, who stood stiffly behind the counter. The young man wasn't saying anything, but his eyes held an urgency that Daniels recognized immediately. Aiden was scared. Daniels forced a casual smile, acting as if nothing was wrong. He folded the receipt in his hand and took a slow sip of his coffee, giving himself a moment to think. He needed to assess the situation without making any sudden moves. He glanced around the store. It seemed quiet, just the usual shelves stocked with snacks and drinks, the bright lights reflecting off the polished floor. There was only one other customer, a man browsing the snack aisle. But then Daniels noticed something strange. The storage room door in the back of the store was slightly open. It was dark inside, but he could make out a shadow moving behind the doorway. Someone was definitely back there. Daniels set his coffee down on the counter. "Slow night, huh?" he said casually, keeping his voice steady. He wanted Aiden to know he had received the message, but he couldn't let anyone else suspect anything. Aiden nodded quickly. "Yeah, just another quiet shift." His voice sounded forced, as if he was trying too hard to act normal. Daniels glanced toward the snack aisle again. The man there wasn't really shopping. He was pretending. His hands never actually picked up anything. Instead, he kept shifting his weight, stealing glances toward the back of the store. That's when Daniels knew. This wasn't just a random customer. He was watching something, or someone. Daniels casually moved his hand toward his radio. He had to call for backup, but he couldn't let anyone see. If the person in the back realized that the police were onto him, things could escalate quickly. "Well," Daniels said, stretching slightly as if he was just relaxing, "I guess I should get going soon." He kept his voice light, but his mind was racing. He needed to act fast, but he also needed to be smart. One wrong move, and this situation could turn dangerous in seconds. He gave Aiden a small nod, silently letting him know he understood. Then, without drawing attention to himself, he reached for his radio and pressed the emergency button. Backup was on the way. Now, all he had to do was keep things calm until they arrived. Officer Daniels remained calm, but inside, his mind was working fast. He had received Aiden's message, and now he needed to handle the situation carefully. If he made the wrong move, things could go badly very quickly. He took another slow sip of his coffee, acting as if nothing was wrong. His eyes casually scanned the store, taking in every detail. The man in the snack aisle was still pretending to shop, but Daniels could tell he was nervous. His movements were too quick, and he kept glancing toward the back of the store. Then there was the storage room. The door was slightly open, and Daniels had already noticed a shadow moving behind it. Someone was in there. But who? And why? Daniels placed his coffee down on the counter and shifted his weight slightly. He wanted to make sure he was in the best position in case something happened. His hand rested near his belt, ready to react if needed. Aiden stood behind the counter, trying to act normal, but Daniels could see the fear in his eyes. His hands were gripping the counter tightly, and his breathing was uneven. He was scared, and for good reason. He had taken a huge risk by writing that message. Daniels knew he needed more information. He couldn't just act without knowing what he was dealing with. He leaned slightly toward Aiden and spoke in a casual tone. "Hey, got any of those glazed donuts left? You know I can't resist those." Aiden hesitated for just a second before nodding quickly. Yeah. Let me check." He turned to the pastry case, but Daniels noticed something. As Aiden moved, he gave the smallest glance toward the back of the store, toward the storage room. That was all Daniels needed. He now knew for sure that the real danger was in the back. At that moment, the man in the snack aisle suddenly put down a bag of chips and walked toward the counter. His steps were quick, and his face looked tense. Daniels watched closely, ready for anything. The man placed a small drink on the counter and reached into his pocket. Aiden flinched slightly, and Daniels tensed, ready to react. But the man only pulled out a few crumpled bills and placed them on the counter. "Keep the change," the man muttered before turning and walking toward the exit. Daniels didn't follow him. Something told him that the real threat wasn't this man. It was whoever was in that storage room. As soon as the door closed behind the customer, the store fell into silence again. The only sound was the soft humming of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then, from the storage room, there was a noise, a soft, shuffling sound. Daniels kept his expression neutral, but inside, he was ready. He didn't know who was back there, but he knew one thing for sure. Something was very, very wrong. Officer Daniels kept his posture relaxed, but his mind was racing. He had heard the noise from the storage room, a faint shuffling sound, almost like someone moving carefully, trying not to be heard. His instincts told him that whoever was back there did not want to be found. Aiden was still standing behind the counter, his hands gripping the edge tightly. He looked at Daniels, his eyes filled with worry. The young worker had already risked a lot by passing the note. Now, he was waiting for the officer to do something. Daniels knew he had to act, but he also had to be smart about it. He couldn't just rush into the storage room without knowing what he was walking into. He took a deep breath and decided to test the waters. He turned slightly, acting as if he were just stretching. Then, in a casual voice, he spoke to Aiden. "You know, I think I left my wallet in my car," he said, patting his pockets as if searching. "Mind if I go grab it real quick?" Aiden blinked, confused at first, but then he seemed to understand. Daniels wasn't really going to his car. He was trying to step outside and call for backup. The silent alarm he had pressed earlier would bring other officers, but he needed to buy some time. Before Aiden could respond, another noise came from the back. This time, it was louder. A soft thud, followed by a quick, panicked shuffle. Daniels knew that sound. Someone had just moved suddenly, as if realizing they were about to be caught. The silence in the store grew heavier. Daniels casually adjusted his belt, making sure his radio and other equipment were in place. He took a slow step toward the storage room, acting as if he were just stretching his legs. "You okay back there?" he called out, his voice calm but firm. For a moment, there was no response, just more silence. Then, finally, a voice came from the storage room. Yeah, just grabbing some supplies," the voice said. It was shaky, uncertain. Daniels narrowed his eyes. That wasn't Aiden's manager. It wasn't an employee. It sounded like someone who wasn't supposed to be there. His grip tightened slightly, his body on high alert. He had dealt with situations like this before. He knew that people who were afraid of getting caught could react in unpredictable ways. Aiden swallowed hard, looking like he wanted to say something but was too scared. Daniels gave him a reassuring nod, silently telling him to stay calm. Then, without warning, the storage room door moved. It didn't swing open completely, but it opened just enough for Daniels to see a shadow shift behind it. Someone was watching them, waiting, deciding what to do next. Daniels didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, his eyes locked on the dark space beyond the door. A deep silence filled the store. Officer Daniels stood still, his eyes locked on the slightly open storage room door. His heartbeat remained steady, but his body was fully alert. He knew that whoever was inside had realized they'd been noticed. Aiden was frozen behind the counter, barely breathing. His eyes darted between Daniels and the storage room, as if waiting for something to happen. His fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the counter. Then, without warning, the door moved again, this time, swinging open faster. A figure stepped out. It was a man, his clothes slightly wrinkled, his face tense. He had a rough look about him, like someone who hadn't slept in days. But what caught Daniel's attention first was the way the man's eyes flickered between him and Aiden. Nervous, anxious. And then Daniel saw it. The man wasn't alone. He had a young woman with him. She looked terrified, her hands clenched tightly in front of her. Her hair was messy, and her face was pale, like she had been trapped for hours. The way she stood close to the man, the way her shoulders were stiff, Daniels could tell something was wrong. The man cleared his throat. We were just looking for the bathroom," he said quickly, his voice uneven. "Didn't mean to scare anyone." Daniels didn't move. He just studied the man carefully. His breathing, his hands, the way he shifted from foot to foot. Everything about him screamed trouble. Aiden swallowed hard. Daniels knew the young worker had to be terrified, but he also knew Aiden had been brave enough to pass him that message. He wasn't going to let that bravery go to waste. Daniels gave a small, easy smile. "Bathrooms on the other side of the store," he said, his voice casual. "Not in the storage room." The man hesitated. It was small, but Daniels noticed it. A tiny pause. A moment of panic. "Yeah, my mistake," the man muttered, his grip on the woman tightening just slightly. Daniels saw it. The way she tensed even more. The way her eyes darted to Aiden for a split second, like she was silently pleading for help. She wasn't with this man by choice. Daniels felt his muscles tense, but he forced himself to stay relaxed. If he reacted too quickly, the man might panic. If he panicked, he might do something dangerous. The door chimed. Another customer entered. It was just a random person, unaware of what was happening. But that moment of distraction made the man twitch, his eyes flicking toward the door. Daniels used that second to shift his stance slightly, angling himself closer. He needed to be ready. The man was on edge, and Daniels knew one thing for sure. This situation was about to explode. Officer Daniels stayed completely still, carefully watching the man in front of him. Every second felt heavy, like a stretched-out moment before a storm. He could see it, the nervousness in the man's eyes, the tight grip on the woman's arm, the way his fingers twitched slightly. Aiden stood frozen behind the counter, his face pale. He didn't dare move, but Daniels could tell he was holding his breath. He knew this was a dangerous situation. The young woman's eyes flickered toward the door for the briefest second. Daniels caught it. She wanted to escape. She needed help. Daniels slowly exhaled, keeping his voice calm and steady. "What's your name?" he asked the woman, keeping his tone light, as if making conversation. The man answered before she could speak. "She's my sister," he said quickly. "We were just stopping for a drink." Daniels noticed how the man didn't say her name. Another red flag. He was lying. The woman's body tensed even more, her fingers slightly curled like she wanted to say something but was too afraid. Daniels had seen this before. Fear, hesitation, the silent way people asked for help without words. The gas station door chimed again. This time, Daniels knew who it was. Backup had arrived. A second officer, Officer Ramirez, walked in, pretending to be just another customer. But Daniels knew he had heard the emergency call. He saw the way Ramirez's eyes quickly scanned the store, taking in the situation. Daniels gave the smallest nod. A signal. Ramirez walked to the drink cooler, casually grabbing a bottle of water. "Quiet night?" he asked, his tone easy, like he wasn't paying much attention. Daniels turned his attention back to the man. "You said she's your sister," he said, keeping his voice calm. "What's her name?" The man hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Sarah," he said. Daniels saw the way the woman flinched slightly. That wasn't her name. Daniels took a step closer. The air in the store felt tighter. He had to be careful. If the man panicked, he might do something reckless. "You okay, ma'am?" Daniels asked gently, directing the question to the woman this time. She opened her mouth slightly, like she wanted to speak, but before she could, the man's grip tightened on her arm. "She's fine," he snapped. "We were just leaving." Daniels knew he couldn't let that happen. Ramirez, still standing near the cooler, gave a slight nod. It was time to act. Daniels took a slow breath. He had to be quick. He had to be careful. Because this situation was about to reach its breaking point. The store felt completely still, as if time had slowed down. Officer Daniels could feel the tension in the air. The man standing in front of him was growing more nervous by the second. His grip on the young woman's arm was tighter now, his knuckles turning white. Daniels knew that if he didn't act fast, things could take a dangerous turn. He had seen it before. When people got desperate, they did unpredictable things. He took a small step forward, keeping his voice calm. "Sir, I need you to let go of her arm." His words were clear but not aggressive. He didn't want to startle the man into making a rash move. The man's eyes darted toward the door, then to Officer Ramirez, who was still standing near the drink cooler. He knew he was outnumbered now. "I told you," the man said, his voice sharper now. "She's my sister. We were just leaving." The young woman, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly spoke. It was soft, barely above a whisper. "Please," she said. Her voice was shaky, filled with fear. That was all Daniels needed to hear. That one word told him everything. She wasn't with this man by choice. She was scared. She needed help. Officer Ramirez slowly placed his water bottle on a nearby shelf and took a small step forward. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "let her go." The man's breathing grew heavier. His eyes flickered between the two officers. He was realizing that he was trapped. Daniels saw the shift. The way the man's body tensed, the way his shoulders squared as if he was preparing to make a move. Then it happened. The man yanked the young woman toward him, trying to use her as a shield. But Daniels had been ready for this. In a flash, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it just enough to loosen his grip. At the same time, Officer Ramirez moved in from the side, blocking the man's escape. "Let her go," Daniels ordered, his voice firm now. The man struggled for a second, but he was outmatched. Within moments, Ramirez had secured his other arm, and together they brought him down to the floor. The man let out a frustrated yell, but it was over. Daniels quickly turned to the young woman. She was shaking, tears forming in her eyes. But she was free. Aiden, who had been frozen behind the counter, finally let out a breath. His face was pale, but his eyes were filled with relief. The store was silent again, but this time, it wasn't because of fear. It was because the danger was finally over. Daniels looked at the young woman, offering a reassuring nod. "You're safe now," he said gently. She nodded slowly, still shaken but clearly relieved. But even as Daniels secured the man in handcuffs, he knew this wasn't over yet. There were still questions that needed answers. The store was filled with a heavy silence. The man lay on the floor, handcuffed, his face tense with frustration. Officer Daniels and Officer Ramirez exchanged a glance before lifting him to his feet. He no longer looked aggressive, just defeated. The young woman took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. She looked at Daniels, her eyes filled with both relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniels gave her a small, reassuring nod. "You're safe now," he said gently. Aiden, who had been holding his breath behind the counter, finally let out a sigh of relief. His heart was still pounding, but he knew he had done the right thing by passing that note. If he hadn't, who knew what could have happened? Officer Ramirez led the man outside, where another patrol car had just pulled up. The red and blue lights flashed against the glass of the gas station, making everything feel surreal. The man didn't resist anymore. He knew it was over. Daniels turned to the young woman. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated for a moment, as if still processing what had just happened. Then, in a shaky voice, she said, "Emily." Daniels nodded. "Emily, do you know this man?" Her eyes flickered toward the door, where the man was being placed into the patrol car. She shivered slightly, as if just the thought of him scared her. Then she shook her head. "No," she admitted. "I don't know him. He tricked me. Said he needed help with his car, but when I got close, he forced me inside." Her voice cracked slightly. "I didn't know what to do." Daniels felt a wave of anger rise inside him, but he pushed it down. His job was to protect people like Emily, and now she was safe. "You're very brave," he told her. "We'll make sure you get home safely." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She nodded, trying to compose herself. Aiden stepped forward, still looking a little shaky himself. I just knew something wasn't right," he admitted. "I had to do something." Daniels gave him an approving nod. "You did exactly the right thing," he said. "Because of you, she's safe." Aiden's face brightened slightly, as if the weight of the situation was finally settling in. He had made a difference. Outside, the officers finished securing the man in the car. Daniels knew there would be paperwork. investigations, and more details to sort out. But at that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Emily was safe, and the man who had tried to harm her was caught. As Daniel stepped outside, he looked back at Aiden, who still stood behind the counter. "You ever think about becoming a cop?" he asked with a small smile. Aiden chuckled nervously. "I think I've had enough excitement for one night." Daniels laughed softly. "Well, if you ever change your mind, we could use more people like you." Aiden smiled, his heart swelling with pride. And as Officer Daniels walked out into the night, he knew that one small message on a receipt had changed everything.